The newest entry in our continuing series of guilty pleasure movies is the Sylvester Stallone Sharon Stone collaboration, The Specialist.
His identity is unknown. An explosives expert, he uses his skills to punish those the law cannot reach.
Your specialist name is Ray Quick. He's ex-covert ops. Worked with me, in fact, years ago. This guy is good, Joe. He could put a bomb in your crab shell. You wouldn't even know it.
You think the killing is gonna make everything all right?
Something has to.
The Specialist.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of the Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I want to thank you all for spending some of your Tuesday morning here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today will mark the 22nd entry in our continuing series of guilty pleasure movies, and it will be the 6th, count them 6, guilty pleasure movies starring none other than my guy, Sylvester Stallone. And let's see if memory serves. Can I name the other 5? Get Carter, Tango and Cash, Daylight, Over the Top. Well, it wasn't Lock Up. Cobra, the first one. Oh my God, the fact that I almost forgot the ultimate Stallone guilty pleasure movie in Cobra. But today's film, it's good that I was able to remember that. I thought I was going to have to start over. But today's film holds a special place in my little heart because it was released during my very first semester at New York University. I discussed it in the Rear Window episode the other day, that Rear Window was the first film that I actually screened while a film student at New York University Cinema Studies program. That was at the probably August 30th or 31st. It could have been September 1st of 1994. But The Specialist, directed by Luis Loza, who had done a very interesting movie with a young Billy Zane and Tom Berenger called Sniper. But today's movie, an ultimate 90s trash guilty pleasure movie, is the Sylvester Stallone starrer, The Specialist. And The Specialist is a movie that is not well remembered by history. This is not some hidden gem that I'm turning you on to. The film's got a 10% at Rotten Tomatoes. It makes Daylight look like Citizen Kane. Not really exaggerating by that much. The film it's just so cheesy, it's trashy. The performances are, if you'll excuse the Stallone film, they are so over the top. Everybody but Sly they just seem to exist to chew scenery. Sly's the only one who gives a real performance here because he stays within his comfortable range. He doesn't give the big emotions. He doesn't try to turn this into A Streetcar Named Desire or something to channel the early Brando. His character, another extraordinary, I love the name. His name is Ray Quick. Ray Quick. He was Ray Tango in Tango and Cash. He's Ray Quick here in The Specialist. And I guess because he'll kill you quick? Maybe? But Sly was now into his second phase of being an action star. And unfortunately, the second phase, which started off so well with Cliffhanger, Memorial Day 1993, huge hit. Hey, great movie. They're talking about making a sequel now. Gabe Walker, not one of Sly's best heroes, but that's the guy from Cliffhanger. And then Demolition Man was a hit. It should have probably been an even bigger hit, but Demolition Man was a hit. It's actually a really good science fiction film with a lot of kind of funny ideas. And the actor Bob Gunton, who played the warden a year later in The Shawshank Redemption, has a really funny role playing a similar kind of an asshole, not nearly as bad, in Demolition Man. John Spartan, you are fined 1 credit for violating the Verbal Moralities Code. So much for the seashells. Or as Stallone says, so much for the seashells. But Sly dovetailed from the dual successes of Cliffhanger and of Demolition Man for what on paper seemed to be not just a box office hit, but an opportunity to actually, we can do an action movie and maybe it'll be a little bit different, get a great cast. So we have Eric Roberts Julia Roberts' older brother. I mean, he's an Oscar nominee for Runaway Train. He's not really that great of an actor, but he is a very interesting looking guy. And then you got Rod Steiger, an Oscar winner for The Pawnbroker 27 years prior. And you have a guy who is an end boss, a cheat code. I mentioned how Diane Lane is one version of a cheat code, that she is fantastic in every movie. Well, a guy that gave one great performance, sometimes hammy, sometimes just chewing scenery, but never less than entertaining, James Woods. So this is one of those weird movies where there are multiple apparent main villains, because in the world, your typical Stallone film, you got one bad guy. Usually, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's facing off with the T-1000 in Terminator 2. In Terminator 1, he's the lone villain. But in this movie, you have Rod Steiger as a crime boss, so I guess he's the main villain. But then you have Eric Roberts as the son, who seems to be kind of running the business, so maybe he's the main villain. But James Woods, ultimately, he plays the role like he's the guy. And Woods has moments in this film that show why he has been, even though he hasn't worked in a really long time, but why he was such a commodity, why he was the guy when Quentin Tarantino wrote what became Reservoir Dogs, the key, pivotal character of Mr. Orange, played beautifully, as it turned out, by Tim Roth. But James Woods wrote Quentin Tarantino wrote Mr. Orange for James Woods. Tarantino was not able to get the script to him. He didn't have the connections. And when Harvey Keitel, who was already on board trying to get the movie made, when he called James Woods' agent, he was laughed off the phone. Woods never saw the script. Tarantino said, "Oh, okay, well, I guess we'll go with Tim Roth. Tim Roth, great actor, great actor." Tarantino, like Scorsese, talks a mile a minute because he's got so many ideas. Guy's IQ is probably 170. But James Woods in this film, every line reading, he is an actor who is attempting to take the film away from its star. And sometimes that would backfire, but in a movie that is almost deliberately awful, such as this one, it works. Everybody chewing scenery. There's a moment where Rod Steiger, as the crime boss, and Eric Roberts as the son, and James Woods, what's his name, Ned? Not a great name. They're like having brunch, and each guy is trying to overact and ham it up more than the other. The way Eric Roberts, instead of saying, "Hey, we gotta kill this guy," waste him. Rod Steiger with the overwrought accent, "I want my son protected 24 hours a day." Hey, this guy's good. He could put a bomb in your crab shell and you wouldn't even know it. Woods' best moment in the movie, though, he's on the phone with Stallone and they're taking turns. The backstory is, if you give a shit, the two guys used to work together. They were like CIA, real dirty ops. Stallone had a certain code. James Woods does not have any code. So in this one moment, Stallone is he's screaming at James Woods, and he calls him big guy. Stallone should have maybe gotten an Oscar nomination just for the way he says big guy. Is that how you do it, big guy? So he says, "You got no honor, you got no code." And James Woods is practically, he's got like a walkie-talkie in his hand. He's chewing scenery so intensely, it looks like he's going to swallow the walkie-talkie. He's like, "I'm going to take your heart, and I'm going to close your heart in my hand." It's just so bad, but it's so bad it's good. The film is entertaining from first frame to last. And Sly wanted the opportunity to work with Sharon Stone. See, Sharon Stone is very interesting. She's had a very long career. She's had her ups and downs, health crises, unfortunately bad marriages to some very powerful people like Phil Bronstein. But Sharon Stone is somebody who was a minor star in the mid-'80s, who then became a major star in the 90s. For two big movies, Total Recall and Basic Instinct. And I would argue that her performance is better in Total Recall. Her character is actually very interesting as it's presented. A little like Laura Linney in The Truman Show. Mild spoiler. For either film, actually. But Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct, which is not a great movie, it was an enormous, humongous runaway box office hit, which landed in theaters just after Wayne's World, for reference. It's one of the Gen Xers, it's one of our standards. Just after Wayne's World. and right at the same time as My Cousin Vinny and White Men Can't Jump. Basic Instinct ended up being just an unbelievably insane worldwide box office hit. It grossed I think close to 400 million. So just insane. And 1992 was not a great year for, Billy Crystal kind of joked about it. He said, it was kind of a poor year for women's parts. In fact, some of the best women's parts were Sharon Stone's in Basic Instinct. And Sharon Stone, to her credit, she knew that joke was coming. She had been tipped off. She laughed. It could have been different if she don't tell that fucking joke. And then Billy Crystal goes there. It was at the Oscars. That's why it came up. But there were actually people that thought that Sharon Stone could get a Best Actress nomination for Basic Instinct. That didn't happen. But she got one after The Specialist the following year in Martin Scorsese's Casino, which I'm supposed to like it. It's right in my wheelhouse. The gambling, the blackjack, professional blackjack player, poker player, did not like Casino. It's not good. But Sharon is capable and has shown that she's capable of adding more to the role, even when she was just considered, wow, she's so hot. So Stallone was looking forward to working with her. And if we're being honest, they actually have pretty good chemistry. And another thing that Sly does here, there had been a sense that Stallone couldn't laugh at himself, unlike his frenemy, and now for real, BFF, Arnold, who never had trouble poking fun at himself, laughing at himself. Sly, very serious, not that there's anything wrong with that, super intense, unbelievably restless. He struggled with these things, and the idea was that maybe he was just too full of himself or too vain or took himself too seriously. So it was known that he was 5'9", 5'10", maybe 5'10" and a half. Nobody knew for sure. But there are no movies until The Specialist where you see he's kind of on the shorter side. And to his credit, in this movie, there is a moment where Stallone and Sharon Stone are about to have sexual relations, I think. And you see that she's pretty much the same height as he is. And I remember, this is a ridiculous memory, but I remember watching the movie with my dad and and he's like, I can't believe Stallone is telling us how short he is. This is incredible. Because my father, as a guy who was 6'1" and a half, it used to bother him that, why doesn't he just let it? It's okay, not everybody is tall. But Stallone, by this point in his career, the second generation of Stallone as an action star, warts and all. He was turning the page. Hey, I'm not 6'2". I'm not even 6 feet. Sharon in heels will tower over me. Good. So this film, if you want to get into plot, it's so absurd. But the nominal plot is, it's set in Miami, gorgeous locations. The film is really well shot. The action sequences, the fight sequences are very well orchestrated. And the effects work is top notch. The stunt work and the effects work. No green screen. This is all mechanical production effects, some of which look as if they were quite dangerous. But the plot is that Sharon's family, when she was a girl, was bumped off by the Rod Steiger character, the head of this crime family. It could be like a Tony Montana type. I think he's supposed to be Cuban. Steiger's accent is almost as bad as Al Pacino. I love Al. But Al Pacino in Scarface, I mean, it's up there or down there with John Malkovich. See, John Malkovich in Rounders, it's like he's having fun with it and he's fucking with the audience. He's so absurd with that accent. I don't think that Rod Steiger was going for the same effect in here that either Al in Scarface or John Malkovich in Rounders, where the accent, it adds to the entertainment value. I think Steiger was trying to give a real performance. This is not that movie. The joke with Mark Hamill, I just saw it again on social media. There are certain movies that you pay attention to certain things and certain movies that you don't. But Mark Hamill tells the story. In the original Star Wars, there was a continuity thing that was bothering Mark Hamill, and he conferred with Harrison Ford. He said, Harrison, I think that we got a problem here because we were supposed to have already been in the garbage thing, and Harrison Ford is presumably checking out. I should be covered in shit. I should be covered in shit. And my hair is dry, and it doesn't make sense. And then he goes into his Harrison Ford impersonation. He goes, kid, if they're staring at your hair, we're in big trouble. Rod Steiger thought that anybody was going to give a shit about how precise and how real-time accurate his Cuban accent is. Nobody fucking cares. No, but this is not that movie. This is not even close to that movie. But he plays this crime boss who has bumped off Sharon Stone's family. Her name is Mae Monroe in the world of the movie. And so she hires Stallone, who is now sort of rogue expat. He has left. He's not working for the government anymore. He's left the CIA. And he is a bomb expert. Now, he can presumably kill people with a gun or kill people with his bare hands with his training. But his specialty, the specialist, real clever way to have a title, right? He's playing the title character, the specialist. He's a guy that you call in when you want to blow somebody up real good. So here comes Sly. And he points out the obvious. And this was a line that was in Get Carter, only it wasn't Sly delivering it. In the movie Get Carter, that's a film, that's another absurd guilty pleasure. In Get Carter, Michael Caine is telling Sly's character of Jack Carter, you're going to end up getting killed. You're trying to get revenge. Revenge doesn't work. And Sly goes, sure it does. In The Specialist, there's a scene where Stallone, I guess he's supposed to be naked. Of course, he's showing off how insane he looks. He's about 2% body fat. Fucking guy. I think he was 46, 47 already. He's shredded beyond possibility. And so she's saying why it's so important to kill all these people. And he said, it doesn't bring them back. Is it really that important? And she pretty much says, yeah. So she's taking what he said years later, opposite Michael Caine. Sure it does. He's saying, this doesn't work. She's saying, something has to. Sly is there to systematically, one by one, he's going to bump off Steiger. He's going to bump off Eric Roberts. And then he is going to have some kind of one-on-one, mano-y-mano, in the immortal words of Andrew Dice Clay and Ford Fairlane. He and James Woods are going to have some kind of a showdown. Now, James Woods, I mentioned Sharon Stone's Oscar nomination from Casino. James Woods was in Casino, and there were a lot of people that thought he should have been nominated for supporting actor for that film. He's really good. Yeah, Woods just one of those, he's a cheat code. You can't find a movie in the 90s, or the late 80s for that matter, where he is not either giving a great performance or adding hugely to the entertainment value just by being James Woods. Hell, he made a film with Robert Downey Jr. The hell? True Believer, 1989. Robert Downey Jr., an alpha on screen, a dominant screen presence. In that movie, James Woods acts circles around him. The Hard Way, action comedy, successful film with Michael J. Fox as a spoiled movie star who starts to ride along with a New York City police officer played by Woods. You barely remember Michael J. Fox, he's the star of the film. That's how strong of an actor James Woods is. And in this movie, he's just way overdoing it. And it's gold. It's absolute gold. Every line reading, he's just so committed to the bit. So The Specialist, the full budget, including marketing, was only $45 million. Easy for me to sit here and say only. And I realize that's 30 years ago, so it would be a lot more. But here's another film school memory for you, right? So the full budget, including marketing, was 45. The movie grossed $53 million in the United States. Now, there are a lot of movies then or now that don't play overseas. Even action movies. Sometimes they go to Europe and nobody goes to see them. The late, great New York University cinema studies professor, one of my favorites, Robert Sklar, the author of the fantastic History of Cinema in America, not surprisingly called Movie Made America. It's actually just as much about the way that movies in this country reflect culture, the American culture at the time, and vice versa. Fascinating stuff. Robert Sklar, he had a quote he used to roll out anytime we talked about Stallone. And we talked about it with regards to Rocky. We talked about it with regards to Rambo First Blood Part 2. He always called him Stallone. He never called him Stallone. He's the only person that I've ever heard refer to him as Stallone. And somebody asked him, Professor Sklar, why do you keep calling him Stallone? He said, oh, in Europe, in Italy, in France, in England. They line up around the block for Stallone. Well, the Specialist, trash that it was, 10% Rotten Tomatoes, just absolute, to call it cinematic junk food, is to not do justice to junk food. 53 million in the United States, which is probably better than it should have done. The film made 117 million in Europe. And why? Because in Europe, they line up around the block for Stallone. He was right. This film had no business grossing $170+ million. There are some films, and we've seen this, there are some films that are critic-proof. Way back when, the Look Who's Talking series, which is now 35 years old, the first pairing, although not on screen, Bruce Willis and John Travolta. Look Who's Talking is objectively speaking, it's a terrible movie. Big hit. Look Who's Talking 2, horrendous. Hit movie. I'm not sure if Look Who's Talking Now was a hit. But there are certain films at certain points in time that are entirely critic-proof. Hey, the first Mortal Kombat from 1995, they didn't screen for critics. It ended up being a pretty significant hit. Also, the effects work is kind of wonky there. It didn't cost a ton. So much of it is a matter of how much does this movie cost to make and what did it cost to market to get people in the seats who didn't really care if the reviews were SHIT. And when I think of The Specialist, so Sly had, the following year, he made 2 movies, one of which was a comic book film, a disposable actioner called Judge Dredd, which is just bad. And it hurts me to know that Stallone, who is so brilliant and such an intense, studious worker, I mean, he's a great writer on top of the fact that he's a pretty good film actor. He wasn't going to ever be the new Brando, but he's not a bad actor. People love him in Tulsa King, a new generation of fans similar to Costner with Yellowstone. People, oh, this guy used to be a movie star, that kind of thing. But Stallone did Judge Dredd, which bombed in the summer of 95. 95, as I've said, the only semi-weak year from the best decade that, by far, in my opinion, Hollywood ever had, the 90s. Nothing better. But then he did a movie that I think was what he was trying originally to do with The Specialist in Assassins, where you have an action movie, but it's a little bit more melancholy and meditative. The characters, it isn't always kinetic motion. They have moments to breathe. And Assassins, directed by the late, great Richard Donner, who originally did Superman in 78, mostly directed Part 2, even though Richard Lester got credit originally from it. And then Dick Donner did The Goonies, and he did Lethal Weapon, and he was one of the primary point men and producers of The Lost Boys. Just an all-time fucking great filmmaker, and by all accounts, a really good dude. But Richard Donner was trying to make a different kind of action film with Stallone, with Antonio Banderas, and with, at the time, a very quickly rising Julianne Moore. And I think it's a good movie. Certainly got a lot better Rotten Tomatoes than Specialist. But it didn't quite work. It didn't quite work. I saw it opening day. I liked it, but a lot of people didn't, and a lot of critics trashed it. And then Sly came back with Daylight the following year. That did just okay. And that's when phase 2 of Stallone's career ended, and he went to phase 3 with Copland, and then kind of went from there. But Stallone has always been somebody who was willing to try to reinvent himself. And in this film, in The Specialist, he and Sharon Stone have the romance component is better than it should be given the rest of the material. Their romance is more believable than, it's maybe the most believable element in a film that is just nothing but, okay, this couldn't happen, 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 this couldn't happen. The romance, okay, that I can buy. But almost everything else, no thank you. Stallone was in such impeccable physical condition. Now, he had lost a lot of weight. Obviously, he wasn't walking around at 200. There are certain movies where he is quote-unquote ripped and he's bigger, like Rambo First Blood Part 2. I'm not sure if we said what movie did he have the most impressive combination of the conditioning, with the abs and size. It might be Rambo 3. It could be Rambo First Blood Part 2. I didn't actually do a study of this. But in The Specialist, Stallone had suffered an injury. He had fucked up his shoulder. He had popped a blood vessel while he was making Cliffhanger, which was not an easy shoot. So he was never as big again. But in Cliffhanger, in Judge Dredd, in Demolition Man, and in The Specialist, he pretty much has the same look, especially in Demolition Man and The Specialist. So they had the idea for this big sex scene between Sharon Stone and Sylvester Stallone. And it takes place in a shower that also kind of looks like a sauna. It's very, very strange. And they almost look like two pieces of sculpture at one point, where their bodies almost mesh. And it's actually, given the fact that it's more or less an X-rated scene in an R-rated movie, it's pretty good camera work and pretty clever the way they shot this love scene. And so when it was all said and done, when Sharon Stone was promoting the movie, and Sharon, like Sly, somebody who was way more intelligent than this material, she was asked about filming the sex scenes with Sly, and the fact that they're vulnerable. Yes, the characters, but as actors, you're not wearing very much. You have, in most cases, at least a reasonable, they could do a little bit of a skeleton crew. I don't know if they did it in this instance, but you're still going to be naked in front of people you barely know. You could get performance anxiety. This is not the easiest thing. Oh yeah, I mean, they're getting paid a lot of money. I get that. So Sharon was asked, what was it like? Did you feel that you could work with him? And she said all the right things. Sharon is the kind of person who, in the moment, she was very careful. She was canny. She didn't want to burn bridges. By the time she was doing the press tour for The Specialist, she was already presumably shooting or in the middle of shooting Casino. So, and that had to have been incredibly exciting to work with Pesci and De Niro and James Woods. Scorsese, tremendous. A tremendous filmmaker, obviously. But she said, I was intimidated because here I am. I feel like this chubby little thing, and he looks like that. Stallone even has shreds in his lower back. He has a Christmas tree going in his lower back. And as one critic, the great Newsday at the time film critic John Anderson, his quote was, "This guy's even got squiggles on his keister." What he was saying was, by bodybuilding standards, Sly had shredded glutes. You're not supposed to be able to do that. There's Sylvester Stallone for you. And the other great quote from John Anderson, which I've mentioned, but for those who haven't heard it, he gave the film 1 star out of 4. He said, this film is so bad you can't believe it, but it does have one great minute of action, the sex scene between Sharon Stone and Sylvester Stallone. And he said, leave it to Sly, the only man perhaps in the history of Hollywood who could have a nude scene, a sex scene with Sharon Stone, and look even better than she does. God bless Sylvester Stallone. The Specialist, now almost 30 years old, the 22nd entry in our continuing series of guilty pleasure movies, and the 6th entry starring none other than Sylvester Enzio Stallone. This has been episode 291 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I want to thank you all for joining me for this, let's face it, lighthearted episode here on this Tuesday in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or any of the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.